when you're working with the biodynamic process of animal control, it's not about dead animals, apart from the ones you use to borrow their skins from. It's about a process that makes them feel uncomfortable in a certain area and they all go away. And one case in point is with possums on a certain part of the Thames coast, where one farmer put the possum preparation around the perimeter of his farm, and it's now almost 19 years and 2 treatments since he's had possums. He still has no possums, and he said the area cleared of possums has got bigger and bigger and bigger till it covers pretty much the whole watershed that he's in at the moment. So this works, but to get somebody of a scientific fraternity to come and look at it, it's almost like you're telling them that if they step on the property, you'll shoot them forthwith, and they tend not to come. So this is a difficult process.
Hi, this is Bruce Lipton, and you're listening to Planet FM.
Kia ora, greetings, and welcome to Planet FM 104.6. I'm Tim Lynch, and I trust that you are doing well. I invite you to stay with me over the next hour as we discuss and find ways to take care of our unique and magnificent green planet Earth. On the phone from the Coromandel, I have Peter Bacchus, and Peter has been involved in biodynamics for 65 years of his life. This is a profound time of being engulfed, or shall I say embedded, in such a powerful modality, biodynamics. So, Peter, thank you very much for wanting to let people know about the intricacies and the magnificence of this science and art. So, kia ora.
Kia ora. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I mean, it's been a long time for me to get back into the game. I interviewed Peter Proctor, most probably now 10 years ago, and Peter was a practitioner who ended up in India working with Indian farmers. And here we are now, going on 2019, and we need to be able to let people know that there is a profound farming method that needs to get into the public consciousness if we are wanting to, one, clean up the environment, keep the soil on the land by halting erosion, and also sequester CO2 out of the atmosphere. So how did you get involved all those years back, Peter?
I became involved as a result of being the son of parents who had been interested, and my mother's great uncle was the person who went to Europe to study biodynamics in 1924-25, about the time the course was given, and came back and started introducing it to New Zealand at that time. So we were early introducers. And my father went overseas to study in 1933, before he'd met my mother, and they were working on a farm practicing biodynamics when they met. And then my father was offered the opportunity to be an advisor to the Biodynamic Association of Great Britain in 1938, and they married and went across to Europe. But as soon as the war started, the nitrogen fertilizer sort of won the day, and biodynamics had to take a back seat for quite some years. And so immediately after the war, my father and mother brought us back to New Zealand, and they bought a farm with a few dollars from an inheritance that they had, and we were brought up on it. So for me, biodynamics is the way you do things. It's the normal. It will be 100 years since biodynamics was introduced, in a few more years, and they say that it takes 100 years for a new thing to become more widely accepted, and I look forward to it then becoming part of the mainstream of the way we do agriculture by that time, and that's what I'm working towards at the moment.
Very good. 100 years is a long time. I did an interview of James Lovelock many years ago, and he said it was taking 50 years and he was still not getting the uptake from recognising that our planet is a colossal living superorganism. So I can understand the lag, and being able to get these ideas across, it means many generations in some ways have to come through and realise that we're surrounded by magic when we recognise the sun and the moon and the arc of the sun during the day, and how all these weather patterns work and how the seasons come and go. We have to be able to anchor ourselves in the land and be extremely astute and conscious that the world that surrounds us is completely alive.
Yes, that aliveness is really important, but those points that you were mentioning are peripheral parts to do with biodynamics. The core of it, when you think biodynamic, think biologically active. And what we're trying to do is to increase the biological activity of the earth. With what we have been doing over the last 100 years or so, perhaps a little bit more, the biological activity of the earth has been ignored or even killed or put to sleep, and it needs to be reactivated and woken up again. And one of the main streams of biodynamics is to wake up the forgotten organisms of the environment that are really part of the whole circle of nature. We walk on the earth, but we tend not to take any note of those that do the very important work under the earth. They sequester carbon, and carbon can hold 4 times its own weight in water. It can take nitrogen out of the atmosphere. The atmosphere has 80% nitrogen. What we need to do in science is to learn how to most effectively and efficiently bring it down to the soil so that the plants have exactly what they need, not too much and not too little.
Yes, the fungi and the bacteria, they are the great workers on our planet, and of course from a holistic perspective, there's this necessity for us to be able to really get to grips with this. So can you carry on, please, Peter?
Yes. Well, we're driving for the earth to have worms, but when humans and animals have worms, it's considered to be not good, but when the earth has it, they are the macroorganisms of the soil that we can see that indicate to a certain extent when everything else is working. So we need to become fully active. The cycles of nature need to be fully active from below ground to above ground. The organisms in the soil are of more or less 3 trophic layers, and that means 3 general layers, and the first one is very high in protein. The next one sort of like 5 to 1. The next one is something like 10 to 1, and then there's another layer at 100 to 1, and then there are the birds and the beetles and things that we see flying around above. And so as each of those consumes the layer before, they spit out nitrogen into the soil, and that is available to the plant world, which then takes it up, uses it, and recycles it back. And so all these cycles, it's like an old-fashioned clockwork. There are little wheels and big wheels, and all the wheels need to work together in harmony, and the most important bit is to remember the harmony. Now, to help this along, there are a number of medicinal herbs used that go through a preparation process that in many cases involves parts of an animal, and this helps to ensoul them or make them more sensitive and more active, and helps to guide the biological process above and below the soil. And we use this quite extensively to facilitate the processes that need to take place. So we need to keep this whole process going, and we activate these herbs in such a way that we can inoculate compost heaps. We're making them homeopathically available so that we can treat larger areas and help the farmers who are otherwise busy to get these processes into action. And there's one that I'm working with particularly at the moment, and they say farmers often get depressed. Well, he says he's the happiest and most satisfied he's ever been in his whole farming career. The cows are happier, they're milking better, and they're eating the pasture off evenly, they're leaving no clumps so he doesn't need to top it, and life and work are a happy adventure for him at the moment. Just over a year ago, he was in a not very happy place. So it's good to see these processes lifting people up and lifting the whole processes of farming up to make farming a much more pleasurable activity. We haven't got his farm anywhere near to where it could go, but it's a matter of just taking one step at a time. If you try to take 2 steps at a time, you usually finish up tripping over. So just taking along quietly. Now, when we get to things like sequestering carbon, this is important for the photosynthesis process to be at its optimum. And when we get all the preparations working properly, then we can, for much of the year, can almost double the amount of photosynthesis happening in the plant, which doubles the amount of sugar made and doubles the amount of carbon, because sugar is 41% carbon, doubles the amount of carbon that is fed down through the roots to feed the soil's biology. And this is one of the reasons why, with biodynamic assistance, the soil's biology can grow more strongly and make the soil much more resilient to the effects of climate change. Now, if this was mainstream and everybody farmed to keep this maximum sugar process going, the maximum carbon sequestering going, the climate change adverse effects would disappear. Once everybody got on with it, I would say it wouldn't be much more than 10 years before our climate became what used to be normal 100 years ago. So we need to get on with it. It can be done, but what is the difficult bit is people understanding how and why all these things happen. For many, there's too much of it sounds like magic because it doesn't fit the material science that is practiced largely today. And we need to be able to think about energy, because even when we use a material substance, it's not the material substance itself that does the work, it's the energy that relates to it.
The field.
Yeah. So in the whole planet, as you mentioned right at the beginning, is an energetic organism. It's a living organism just the same as we are. And we can cover it with poison, or we can cover it with nurturing materials and see that the earth is nurtured and taken care of so that it becomes more and more alive. But we have to start with our own little bit and work out from there.
So how the Biodynamic Association, which is biodynamic.org.nz,
yes,
is it growing as naturally? We'd like to see it grow really fast, and we want people to go up and look at their website and then start to ask more questions and research and read, and then commit somehow, even if it's only half the farm to start off with, because of concerns about possibly loss of production when you lock certain areas of land away so that it can heal for a year or two. Can you tell us what way we can encourage people to really study biodynamics?
That would be, more members are certainly welcome. More people are welcome to investigate. The association does have a basic training course, and next year we're planning to have an advanced training course for those who want to take it a step further. And to tell you about the conventional farmer I started to work with in the last 12 months, we have actually picked his production up. We have made his cows more comfortable. Individually they're producing better, and apart from a flood during the winter, which upset the process, his whole process is improved and getting better and better. And I'm using a combination of understanding of the minerals that are active in soils and plants and the biodynamic preparations. To fit the way he works, we're using them in a homeopathic form so that with the equipment that he has available to him, he is quickly and easily able to deploy them at the right time and place. And the time and place is an important function as part of the whole thing. So if you take advice from the people who understand it fully, it is possible to change over without losing production.
Excellent. And Peter, can I mention, because I think it's important, that I've been to what you call stirs, where you stir microorganisms in buckets of water and you do it for an hour. Can you explain to people this side of it too? Is this too early for you to mention this, or do you want to actually follow through a process?
Well, yes, that is a common practice. What is happening here is that we're taking cow manure from a milking cow, because a milking cow has more calcium functioning in its body and in its dung, and so there's more vital calcium there, and that is placed in a cow's horn and buried in the earth so that it can experience the winter sunshine. In the spring it is dug up, and very small parts of that are placed in water, slightly warmed water, and stirred vigorously traditionally for 1 hour. We have also worked with it by taking it into homeopathic dilution. Homeopathic dilutions allow a little to go a long, long way. And so in the garden setting, stirring for an hour works just fine. It's a very social thing where a group of people can gather together and stir this up and take it home and spray it onto their own little plots of land.
Yes, I've done that myself.
Yes, but when it comes to working with 600 or 1,000 acres, then we need to move to a different way of getting that to happen. But yes, the 1 hour stir of both the preparation 500 and then manure that has had the effect of all the compost preparations in it as well can also be stirred and applied, and many people have found that is very, very helpful. And then the important thing that people often forget, that there is another preparation that experiences the summer sunshine. That is when you fill the cow's horn with a very, very finely ground quartz. So the final bit is ground between two plates of glass until it is as fine as talcum powder. And this experiences the summer sunshine, and it helps the sugars to form. It makes the plant absorb a lot more light and enhances the photosynthetic activity when applied in the right time. So this spray has to go to the plant surface, so it should be applied early in the morning, preferably with the morning bird song.
Yes.
And the other should be applied, the best time is in the evening with the evening bird song. But the plant's pores close gradually around the middle of the day, and so if you want something to go into the soil, as you do with the cow manure sprayed material, then you spray late in the day when it will run off the plant. If you've got plants over the soil, will run off the plant and down into the soil and work in the soil. The atmosphere is also working towards the condensation. So dew point in the morning is the final condensation. So after dew point, we then work into the evaporative process. So when you put the morning spray on while the evaporative process is going on, then your spray is much, much more likely to adhere to the leaf where it belongs rather than run off and into the soil. Those are two basic little things. And as I say, for the home gardener, for the lifestyle block person, stirring for an hour is really good. But when you have also a few of the homeopathic preparations, if the right time comes that the plants need an application of one of the other preparations, it can be applied in 10 minutes to a quarter of an hour by applying it to water in a sprayer, spray it on the plants, put it back in the shed, hop on your bike and off to work, or whatever it is you go to work on. So the job gets done at the right time, and it just makes so much difference rather than thinking about it and saying, oh, well, I might do it at the weekend, and then at the weekend you say, oh, no, the moon's wrong. So you're always finding excuses why you don't get it done. And it's important when something needs to be done, it is done.
Immediately, virtually.
Well, as at the appropriate time.
Yes.
I mean, when you come to a corner when you're driving a car, turning the wheel at the right time makes all the difference. If you don't turn the wheel at the right time, you finish up in the ditch or on somebody else's grill.
Yes. And tell me, Peter, what is the name of that particular preparation?
Well, the preparations were all given numbers, and at the time that Steiner was talking to the farmers, he was also talking to the doctors and pharmacists. So they decided to leave 499 places for pharmaceutical preparations and start the agricultural preparations at 500. So the first one he spoke about was number 500, and so it's frequently known as preparation 500. And the next one, which was given, was the quartz preparation, that was 501.
Yes.
And then he proceeded to give the compost preparations to the assembled audience, and that became 502 on through till 507, which is valerian, and even 508, which is another silica plant, that equisetum avense, or sometimes known as mare's tail. And this brings a silica process in a different way. But each preparation has its own way of working, and I don't want to go into all the details here, but you're welcome to come and join a program or a training session or read it up. If I go through and explain them all, it gets a little bit boring after a bit.
Yep, I understand. And you mentioned, Peter, Rudolf Steiner. Rudolf Steiner has an influence virtually on every country on Earth, particularly in the Western world, in a hemisphere anyway. And can you give us a quick appraisal of how he came to be involved? Because there's also the water flow forms, and there's many things, and particularly the elimination of pests, which I think is an important one that I'd like you to be able to talk about.
Okay. It's not only the West, it's the East. My brother is a teacher trainer, and later on this week he's off to China, and he makes regular visits to China to train teachers in China, because the Waldorf school system particularly is expanding very rapidly over there.
Well, that's good.
And so more and more teachers need to be trained all the time. There is an increase in the biodynamics over there, but that's happening much more slowly. You mentioned the flow forms. That is the biggest market for the new flow form being made, and we're hoping that this will start to get to a point of profit in the not too distant future. As I've got money invested in that enterprise, it'll be good to see the uptake of that.
Could you explain it to people, because a lot of people would not know what a flow form is?
Okay, a flow form was invented by a Mr. Tom Wilkes quite some number of years ago, when he observed water flowing down a stream and how the water always liked to flow in curves, and he noticed that in certain stream areas it flowed in eddies, first a right-hand vortex and then a left-hand vortex. And so he then set about making forms for water to flow through that kept them actively stirring left-hand, right-hand, left-hand, right-hand, left-hand, right-hand, right down the whole form. And these have been developed and condensed over time. And what they do is impart a new rhythm to water, because water is able to take on energy structures, and it has a memory. And it also very often loses the amount of oxygen it has in it. So these things not only bring it into rhythm, and rhythm and life go together, it brings oxygen into it as well, and oxygen is really important part of life as well. And where these flow forms are set up around ponds that have fish in them, the fish are often seen to gather around the point at which the flow form flows into the lake. And so they're after the more oxygenated water. So we can use them industrially as well for aerating and oxygenating and bringing rhythm into effluent ponds, into sewage waste, we can use them to stir fluids to, like some of the biodynamic preparations, so that the impulse is carried through. I have also used them for potentizing large volumes of liquid. I was working with, the largest one was a 2,000 litre vessel, and that took me 20 minutes to change the potency from one level to the next. And when that was done, I then put it into a sprayer and went out and sprayed it around the farm. And the end result of what we were doing on this particular farm just a few years ago was that the worms became particularly active, to the point where in the first 90 days after the worms became active, after the first good autumn rain, in the next 90 days they would put about a finger thickness of worm cast over the top of the soil, and as far as we can see there were no breaks, no holes. It was just a constant sheet of worm cast, just like you'd got a whopping great big knife and spread Marmite over a sandwich. And so that amounts to quite a large amount of worm casting, and that was only halfway through the time during which the worms are active. So they would have produced that amount again. But when you're farming, you are not doing science, you're observing. And we observed under the electric fence where the cows ate the grass down to the ground and didn't trample, because cows tend not to put their feet under electric fences. And so we could see that this was happening wherever we had an electric fence, and wherever I bent down and looked into the grass, I could see that there's a solid sheet of worm casting. So they tell us how good worm casting is to make in a worm farm, and we were making the whole farm a dairy farm and a worm farm, and it certainly grew the grass.
Yes, very good. Aristotle called earthworms the intestines of the soil, so even 2,300 years back, he was very observant as to how nature worked.
Yes, and one of the key things with working with biodynamics is learning how to observe and learning how to really see what one looks at without any paradigms in place, without any preconceptions, without being told what you can see and what you can't, to really, really look thoroughly and observe exactly what's happening and not what you're told you ought to be seeing happening, which is so often the case, that when we start with science, we start with an assumption and then we build a hypothesis and then we have a scientific process that works the hypothesis to a solution. And so one really needs to start the science process with repeated observations that match up more or less, and then we investigate them rather than setting up an assumption and a hypothesis.
Very good. Tell me, Peter, people like to know how many hectares of land would be, or how many farmers in New Zealand are there doing biodynamics? Listeners want to have some practical, well, they need more data. Is there a good number of them?
There are quite a few, but they are nowhere near enough. And this is a progress that still needs to be made, because the way many people go about it, with the stirring, with the compost making, etc., that it happens in a more labour-intensive manner and a more hands-on manner.
Yes.
And we need to come up to speed with the machinery that's available to help people to be genuine labour-saving without compromising on the quality produced. And in Australia, they're working this much more effectively. I don't know exactly how many hectares are under the method in New Zealand at the moment. I focus on what I'm doing and getting the next one more up to speed and making sure that they are remaining financially together profitable, because in any business you only have a certain amount of time to be unprofitable and then you're out of business. And that's really important for farming as well, that everything we do has to produce a profit. Perhaps not a very big one, but it has to be a profit. And the old saying has it that the difference between a happy man is that the happy man earns $1,001 and it costs him $999 to get there. The unhappy man earns $1,000 and it costs him $1,001 to achieve it. So it's really important for all that the process remains financially viable.
Very much so. Now, can you, in Germany itself, I mean, biodynamics and the farming is very big there, solely because of Steiner's influence from Austria. I heard that there was something like about 12,000 organic farms in Austria alone many years ago. And so there's a profit at the end of the day. There's a good price for the food. It gets a premium at markets, doesn't it?
Yes. When I was visiting Germany in the 60s, for the biodynamic food, which was sold as Demeter through their health shops that they call Reformhäuser, that had a 25% premium. The organic had about a 12% premium, and over and above what was sold in the general grocery or supermarket. And there was a story about one lady whose husband had the lowest salary in that particular village, but she always bought the Demeter produce. And this really, really was noticed and concerned the owner of the health store. And so one day he plucked up courage and he asked her, "Why is it that you always buy this most expensive produce?" And her reply was, "Well, sir store owner, if I didn't, I wouldn't afford to be able to feed my family." And if you look at the other things that occur in days of lost work, of medical expenses, of just feeling ill, a lot of this was avoided, and she said that a little sufficed to satisfy their family, whereas if they had the lowest quality produce, they would have to eat at least twice as much. So she found that buying the top quality food was actually cheaper for the family expenses in the long run.
Yes, I can understand that. Very true. I'm speaking with Peter Bacchus, of Biodynamics New Zealand, biodynamic.org.nz. Peter, you mentioned Demeter, and Demeter goes back to ancient Greece, and Demeter is involved with the harvest and grains. Can you explain a little bit? Because Demeter here in, I think, is it in the Hawke's Bay area, are doing very well in many ways.
Yes, there is a movement there that is going along quite well, but it could be going a lot better. There are a number of things that could be improved, but Demeter was the Greek god of the harvest, or the earth, and what came from the earth. And so the name was chosen for a certification mark quite some time ago, and they have a logo that was designed by a New Zealander from Wellington and used to be on our Biodynamic Council years and years and years ago. It's there, it's working, but it could work a lot better. We didn't pursue the option which would make it more expensive of being able to trade internationally, but I hope that will come to pass in due course.
And so, Demeter, you can, all sorts of health products, aren't there? It's like you can get tinctures, you can get, I think, ointments, and there are a number of facilities there to assist people without having to go into the pharmaceutical realm. There are natural products, aren't there?
Yes, the organic people have organically certified natural products, and they're Demeter certified natural products, and there's also the Veleda or Weleda that makes all the, or most of the remedies recommended by Dr. Steiner to the pharmacists and the doctors. Not all of them are used, but since that time others have been developed. There are doctors mostly in Hawke's Bay, but there's one in Auckland as well, who are qualified to prescribe those materials, and the gardens at the Veleda are worked biodynamically. Back in the early 70s I came down from the Waikato to work in the Veleda gardens for several years and help with the drying of the medicinal herbs and harvesting of them, the ones that went through the laboratory to be processed there. So I was very glad for that, and has helped me and a friend who helped in there to develop the homeopathic aspect of the biodynamic preparations.
Thank you. Now, you've mentioned homeopathy, and the royal family have always used homeopathics for the last, 200 years or so. Again, can you explain just quickly to allow people to get an understanding that it is a viable, extremely viable not medication, but process or modality, bringing in health, bringing in vibration?
I have used it personally most of my life. My parents used it. Where it is properly prescribed and taken as it should be, it is extremely effective. What one is doing is taking an energy and a process. In the old days we used to call them vibes, that a lot of these energies have a certain vibration. They are taken and transferred to a medium so that you can sometimes enhance the energy that is involved and leave the material behind. So in the case of only having a small amount of material, you can multiply this energetic process thousands, sometimes even millions of times over, and have it just as effective, if not more effective, than it was before you started. So I find it very, very effective, and even farmers who don't understand anything about it at all, getting on and using it as directed, also find it extremely effective.
Yes, thank you. I, in the last few months, just found out that John D. Rockefeller and David Rockefeller both used it extensively for their own health, when in actual fact they were generating the pharmacy and the chemical industry to produce this drugged-out paradigm that we've found ourselves ensnared by. And it's a shock to me, realising that they didn't partake of pharmacology. They instead wanted to go straight into natural methods and homeopathy for themselves. This is astonishing.
Well, they must have been wiser men than I give them credit for. But on one side, the business is about making money, and if you look at the turnover of some of the big companies that are the multinationals centred around New York or eastern United States, they have turnovers that are bigger than the whole turnover of New Zealand.
Oh, yes.
And so they could swallow us up and spit us out without even noticing that they had to spit. So they've become very big. So they are first and foremost business people. I mean, the Rockefellers were big on the oil, and a lot of what has come from the early part of medication came out of the oil industry. I mean, aspirin and dispirin have been generated out of the carbons and things that were found from the oil. And obviously, since then, other avenues have been pursued. But I had a friend in the United States in the New York State, and he said a lot of the senior officers of these companies producing the chemicals for farming had an organic gardener themselves, or at least that's what he said, because he was one of them.
I hear you very clearly. Can I ask a little question? I thought willow was one of the main constituents in aspirin.
Yes, that's been chemically copied.
Got it. I understand now.
But yes, the Red Indians used the aspirin in willow for medication, but obviously one couldn't desiccate the whole of the willow forestry to make it, and there would be seasonal processes that would change with time, with the type of season one were having. There'd be a whole lot of little minor changes, and when you manufacture something, you endeavour to have it exactly the same every day, every year, every decade, so that people, know what they're buying. And this is part of the business acumen, is that you work out a process and you gain security in something that can be repeated year in, year out.
I got it. It's a formula. Yeah.
It's the formula. This is the issue, is that you take the formula often that you find in herbs, in plants, in minerals, in the outer world, and then you replicate them so to make a medication that can be replicated year in, year out for as long as people need to use it.
Okay, very good. Peter, so how would you like New Zealand and the farming fraternity, along with the government, educate people to what biodynamics does? Because you said that we can clear out of the atmosphere so much CO2 that if all farmers around the globe took this on and became involved, there would be
There'd be a shortage of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Well, a very interesting way for us to go. And so what's holding the government back? I mean, you said to me the other day that often when a political party, be it the National Labour in particular, are in opposition, they will listen to you, but as soon as they get into power, they are then influenced by the status quo.
Yep. No, they've got government departments that have, it's like they say of science. Science changes one funeral at a time, and there are a lot of civil servants, and so things aren't going to change very fast at that level. They are changing, but not earth-shakingly. So we need to be able to afford the science that can show the scientist with the total materialistic left hemisphere brain way of working with it, that it works time and time again. It's about repeatability. And most of us, self-included, are not scientists. We appreciate some of what science does, but we're not scientists ourselves. And so it makes it very difficult to work this through. And if you don't really fully understand how to tell people about what we're working with, it's even harder for them to understand it, and it's even harder for them to invest money in it. And when people invest money, they expect a return, and whether it's the taxpayers' money or a fertilizer company or a drug company or whatever, if they're investing money in something, they are due to expect a return from their investment, even if they, so to speak, donate it. They're still expecting that spending to achieve something that's going to help their business. So there's not many businesses that are helped by the biodynamic process or anything coming from biodynamics. So there's very little incentive to invest in it. But at the moment there is the possibility that something may happen in the not too distant future, that a little something that a couple of us are pursuing. So we'll see how we get on with the scientific fraternity. But when biodynamics mixed with the scientific fraternity trying to eradicate possums, the process wasn't fully understood and wasn't done properly, and so naturally didn't work, or didn't work in the way that was expected, because the whole modality, the whole thinking process was poison, dead animal. Whereas when you're working with the biodynamic process of animal control, it's not about dead animals apart from the ones you use to borrow their skins from. It's about a process that makes them feel uncomfortable in a certain area and they all go away. And one case in point is with possums on a certain part of the Thames coast, where one farmer put the possum preparation around the perimeter of his farm, and it's now almost 19 years and 2 treatments since he's had possums. He still has no possums, and he said the area cleared of possums has got bigger and bigger and bigger till it covers pretty much the whole watershed that he's in at the moment. So this works, but to get somebody of a scientific fraternity to come and look at it, it's almost like you're telling them that if they step on the property, you'll shoot them forthwith, and they tend not to come. So this is a difficult process. I have made it for the Coromandel Peninsula and got feedback from quite a number of people, and found that if it rains within 1 week of putting the preparation embedded in sand out, that it doesn't work. If it doesn't rain for a whole week, almost 98% chance that it will work, or it has worked. And so there are several places where it has worked, and there are a number of places where I've put it on that it hasn't worked. The possum is the easiest one, but there again, in each case, one has to take animals from the area you wish to treat. And if you haven't got that animal there, then obviously not a pest. The rat I've found to be the most difficult, and the rabbit is somewhere in between. But I did manage to get the rats out with the homeopathic process involved, but with the spreading of the sand, the ash embedded in the sand, I haven't managed to get more than just a temporary disturbance.
Rudolf Steiner in 1924 was involved with an aristocrat in Junker in Silesia, and he was offered the opportunity to get rid of a whole lot of rabbits off his huge estate. So Rudolf Steiner had to say, look, we're going to have to take one animal's life.
Yes.
We got blood, testes from a male...
No testes, just skin.
Oh, well,
the skin is the sense organ of the reproductive system, and I usually take, if I've got a choice, I take the female skin, but the most important thing is that you take the skin of a breeding animal.
Okay. And is there a astrological configuration involved?
There is an astrological configuration that helps, and that is when Venus is in front of the constellation, and I say the constellation, not the sign, so the actual figure of stars that you see in the sky. When Venus is in front of that, and it doesn't happen every year in the right configuration because it has to have recently emerged from behind the sun, so that usually occurs at the moment when Venus goes in front of Scorpio during November and early December.
Yes.
This year it won't happen until January, so this is not a very helpful year. I have had a friend who has done the process when it was totally out of time, and it worked for quite a number of the people who came to his workshop. He was just demonstrating the method, but they went at home and tried it, and one person said that it kept the possums off her roses somewhere in the Coromandel for 4 years, and at that time she left the property, so she doesn't know what happened after that.
Very interesting. I find this a very potent way of being able to discourage pests. I did hear that Himmler of the SS in Germany got a lot of ashes from the concentration camp ovens and put this on aircraft and had people shoveling this ash out of these Junker 88s, I think it was, right across parts of Germany. That was his devious and dark way of wanting to keep the Jewish people out of Germany.
It wouldn't have worked only on Jews, it works on human beings. There's no differentiation between, as far as humans are concerned, between a Jew and a Christian and a Muslim and a whatever else. There might be a slight difference in races from the African to the Asian to the Northern European, but generally speaking, a human being is a human being. And as far as this process goes, it would affect all. But I haven't heard that story, but I have heard the story of somebody flying a glider and flying over an old concentration camp, and the glider just fell. It just lost its ability to fly as he flew over the camp. He must have survived it somehow to tell the story, but he said he lost all effective lift through there. Perhaps he was able to get out of it before he crashed, I don't know, but that's a story that I'm not able to verify, but I've heard it said. I haven't heard the stories that you mentioned.
It was in the book called The Spear of Destiny by Trevor Ravenscroft. It's about the spear that Longinus used to penetrate underneath Christ's ribs whilst he was on the cross. An interesting book. Peter, is there one wonderful little story about biodynamics that you would like to share?
Well, farmers in New Zealand are focusing a lot on depression. From what I've seen of a farmer that was in a difficult and dark place just over a year ago, he's one happy chappy today. And so get happy, find some joy in farming, and find out about biodynamic farming and get some sound advice on how to go about it.
Very good. Yes, when you're standing out there on the land on a nice sunny day and the previous night you had 3 hours of good rain, and it's this time of the year, you can feel the energy coming out of the ground, you can hear all the bird sounds, all the leaves are green, and it just makes you feel at one-ment with the land. Yes,
and it's important that the habitat for birds are included in part of that. My father always used to say the most important aspect of a shelter belt was to stop the wind from blowing the carbon dioxide away. But birds and all the other things that live in shelter belts and trees are very important. You can get fruit from it, you can get farm timber from it, you can get firewood from it over time. And over in Raglan they found that the shelter belts after 10 years were carrying carbon in the roots out into the middle of the paddocks, and they were able to grow more grass with 1/3 of the farm in trees than when there were no trees on the farm.
It's an ongoing scientific, artistic expression of how human beings can live among nature.
Yep, and it is art as well as science, because they talk about the art of agriculture.
Yes.
And it's a culture, agriculture, and a culture of the agar, the earth.
Peter, we're out of time, and I would just want to say thank you very much for giving me of your time, bearing in mind where I've been doing my best to get here from being overseas. So Thank you again.
Thank you.
Yes. So I appreciate your total enthusiasm and your wanting to share. It's been a great learning for me, and I look forward to hearing biodynamics being embraced by the New Zealand government.
Yep. And one of the things we often say is we grow soil and sell cabbages, or we grow soil and sell milk, because when you're farming properly, you should be accumulating soil and rather than losing it. And nitrogen causes, as Steiner said in the third lecture, nitrogen carries oxygen through the carbon framework, and when you put chemical nitrogen into soil, it oxidizes it and gives off carbon dioxide, and so we've lost a lot of our soil carbon to the atmosphere. We need to get it back again.
Excellent. Yes, we need holistic scientists who are earth and soil scientists.
Yep. And we need soil scientists who also understand biology. At the moment, there are hardly any soil biologists left in the scientific industry employed by the government or the universities.
I hear that, yes. So thank you again, Peter.
You're welcome. And if you come to the Coromandel, give us a call, and if we're home, I'll come and have a cup of tea.
I'll definitely look you up. Thank you. Okay.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye.
That was Peter Bacchus of the New Zealand Biodynamic Association, and the website is biodynamic.org.nz. Biodynamic, one word, .org.nz. In summary, biodynamics, which is a holistic, ecological and ethical approach to farming, gardening, food and nutrition. So it's working with the land and all biota. And biodynamics is rooted in the work of philosopher and scientist Dr. Rudolf Steiner, who way back in 1924, his lectures to the farmers opened up a new way to integrate scientific understanding with the recognition of spirit in nature. And biodynamics has continued to develop and evolve since the 1920s through the collaboration of many farmers and researchers around our whole planet. So biodynamics is alive in thousands of thriving gardens, farms, vineyards, ranches and orchards today. The principles and practices of biodynamics can be applied anywhere food is grown with thoughtful adaptation to scale, landscape, climate and culture. It also covers many other unique qualities, particularly when it comes to using cow horns filled with cow manure that are buried under the soil for a specific time and then taken out, put into precise measurements into water, stirred for an hour, and then shaken from a brush over the land or sprayed. It also is a particular way in which you can have flow forms where you can basically, through vortexes, wind up water so that it has more viscosity. And there's another principle, pest management, and finally, composting. How to make good compost and turn it into vibrant, dynamic, life-giving humus. Decide to network. Use every letter you write, every conversation you have, every meeting you attend, every email you send. And remember, even Facebook. To tweet and to express your fundamental beliefs and dreams. Affirm to others the vision of the world you want. Network through thought. Network through action. Network through love. Network through the spirit. You are the center of a network. You are the center of the world. You are a free, immensely powerful source of life and goodness. Affirm it, spread it, radiate it. Think day and night about it, and you will see a miracle happen. The greatness of your own life in a world of big powers, media and monopolies. But of 7.6 billion individuals, networking is the new freedom, the new democracy, a new transparency, and a new form of wholeness and happiness. This originated by Dr. Robert Muller, Chancellor of the World Peace University in Costa Rica, Central America. I invite you to be able to come to greenplanetfm.com, where we have over 400 interviews in our database, which you can readily download and listen to be able to inspire yourself to become the change you want to see in the world and become involved in caring for your children and grandchildren's future. We are also on Facebook, on Green Planet FM and ourplanet.org. Please come and love us. This is Tim Lynch.
And or Lisa Eyre. And Liz Gunn.
In the spirit of Aroha, wishing you a wonderful week. We look forward to being with you next week. I say, Kia kaha and haere rā.